good evening, everyone. My name is Anju Devaskar. I'm Associate Director for Admissions Outreach at Flame University in Pune. And first of all, I would really would like to thank all of you who've taken out time to come and attend this session. And we'll try and be punctual, and I'm sure people are still joining in. And for now, we'll just start with some introduction. So here I would like to start by telling the audience actually what they are going to learn by listening to our speaker, Dr. Santosh Kudtarkar, Dean of Flame School of Liberal Education. But before that, I must tell you that he is someone who not only believes in preparing students for careers or jobs, but he believes in preparing them for life, because he just doesn't teach the subject or believes in teaching the subject. He teaches the person. Therefore, he's much loved, and the students really gravitate towards him for learning lessons for life. Dr. Santosh holds a master's degree in physics from IIT Madras and a PhD from Institution of Mathematical Sciences in Chennai. A theoretical physicist by training, his research interests are in applications of field theory in high energy and condensed matter physics, dynamical systems, and mathematical modeling in social and management sciences. Oof, sir, you've done so much. He's also passionate about quantitative models and has successfully completed multiple industrial projects. His consulting domain of expertise lies in development, testing, validation, and deployment of mathematical, statistical, and machine learning models for consumer research, demand forecasting, and optimization. Dr. Santosh has been associated with Flame since its inception, and sir, we all love you. Today, he's going to speak about how National Education Policy 2020, for which I think all the educators have really welcomed it very warmly. The question still lies on the implementation of the policy, and probably how it's going to impact the future of higher education in India. So now I'm going to invite sir, please, Santosh sir, you can please take over from now. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Anju. These have been exciting times. Of course, these times have been described as unprecedented, right, because of the COVID and many other things. But this is also an exciting time because after 4 years, the National Education Policy has finally seen the light of the day. The committee was formed in 2016. It went through various iterations, and it was, it's 30 years too late as far as education in the country is concerned. But what I'm going to do now, I'll share my screen. This is a very bare bones presentation, and I'll give you, broadly, the tone and tenor of this presentation is that I'm talking to an educated audience, okay, an audience which is invested and wants to, which is invested and works in education, or has an understanding of education in the country works. And, and many of the things that we as educators should be looking at. I'm going to keep away from numbers. There's a lot of data out there. There have been, numerous articles and, talk shows that have covered many of these things. So in spite of my background in data science or data analytics, I'm not going to touch upon any numbers out there, except, throw 2 or 3 percentages here and there. But, this is a talk that, that I would like to, address as an educator. Okay, educator who has worked in, who has taught across the spectrum. Teaching primary school students is beyond me, but I've taught high school, college, university, postgraduate students, PhD students, and so on. And what does the National Education Policy mean, as seen from my eyes, right? And also since, and as seen from the eyes of Flame, from the lens of Flame, which was a pioneering liberal arts institution, right? And I'll be talking about validation of the ideas under which, which Flame was established and so on. But let me just share my screen. If you're, again, a word of warning, if you're looking at hard statistics, this is not the talk and this is not the time to address these things. Right?
Sir, could we take a quick poll into, right, you wanted to know your audience, will that
yeah,
be
Yeah, let me just look at the audience, because if there are students there, I think I can maybe realign my talk as to what it means to them. Not immediately, of course, but what it may mean to their siblings. Maybe 3-4 years down the line, what it would mean for somebody getting into college. Right. So, okay, that's an. There are ex-students too. I see quite a few names who are our alumni. Okay, so I think that category wasn't there in this. Okay, right. So great. Okay. Now I'll try. Yeah,
Yes, so like we see 61% are school counselors and teachers,
great.
and the session was essentially organized for that particular community, and I'm so glad that we have them here. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, great. So let me just share my screen. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Right. So this is, I think that's the title of the talk, Decoding NEP 2020 for Higher Education, but as seen from the trenches. Right. This is as seen from the front lines, not from a regulator's point of view, but essentially from someone who is closely involved in delivering and administering the program in an institution which reflects all the values that the NEP is trying to enunciate in its document. But there have been various drafts that have been floating around. The original draft that came in was nearly 450 pages long. The new NEP policy, which is essentially a guideline as to and gives a direction as to what shape education should take for the next 20 years. They have planned it for the next 20 years. Is around 66 pages. Very readable, right? But then you may get lost in the details about administrative, restructuring that's happening. Then miss out on the important details that affects life for us and you out there, right? Okay. This NEP has been a radical departure from the past. It's not a revolutionary departure. I'll tell you why it's not revolutionary, but it is a radical departure. Because if you were to read the document, and if you were tracking NEP, since its first draft came out, there has been an emphasis on, good citizenship, on life skills, and all other aspects which I'll cover later. But then what I mean by radical is that the earlier NEPs and the earlier education policies were devised by people who were inspired by the English and from the British system of education. Right? That's where our 3-year programs come from. That's where where students were winnowed into streams that you were specified as, you had to decide whether you will be an art student, whether you will be a commerce student, whether you will be a science student, whether you will be an engineering student, and so on. Right? The last NEP2, which happened in '86, also talked about these things. But then, 1986, India is totally different from we are in the third decade of the 21st century, the India that we are, living in. Right? And that's where the radical departure from the past comes in the sense that we seem to have transitioned, okay, from a British system to an American system, where that American is very important, which I will address in the next slide. But then, the underlying document here in the NEP there is a tone of optimism. That there is a line there which says that India will be among the top 3 economies in the world, and we have to prepare Indians to shape the 21st century. Doesn't matter that we have lost 20 years in the 21st century, but then I think, the way the document has been written, that shape, that it will be India's century, at least in the second half of this century, if not the first, having lost more than 2 decades in this, right? So, so the previous policies were, the national education policies were all about access and equity, right? About making sure that, considerable percentage of the population got access to education and they became literate, right? And equity was about affirmative action, the sort of reservation, the Mandal Commission thing. Remember, 86 was NEP, and around the same time, around 88, 89 was the Mandal Commission report and so on, right? It was about social justice and many other things, right? But right now, the focus seems to be on quality, and not just on getting people employed and literate, but also on quality and, inculcating or, delivering 21st century skills. Right? What are those 21st century skills? We all know what those are, but then, it was never put in written format earlier as a vision for the vision for education or the educational system in the country, right? So I would like to call this the liberal artsization of the system. The new NEP policy is about liberal artsization of the system. This is a word that I just invented, but the NEP draft policy 2019 talked about liberalizing making higher education more liberal, in the sense of making it liberal artsy in the American sense of the word. Of course, the last 1 year, 2 years, there have been a lot of culture wars that have been played around. The word liberal has been removed from the draft in the new policy. There is only one reference to the word liberal somewhere, whereas there were whole chapters written on liberal, making higher education more liberal. And what do I mean by liberal? I'll explain along the way, but then making more liberal. But I would like to go back and use this term because it's like, since I'm associated with FLAME, which is a liberal education university, the NEP is all about duplicating or replicating, liberal arts institutions across the country and making every institution liberal artsy. And where is that reflected? That's reflected. I'll come back to this. That's reflected in the vocabulary itself. I just made a word cloud of all the terms that are being used very frequently in NEP, right? If you were to look at, the document itself, it talks about developing good human beings, right? It uses, if you can see the words, it uses terms like good citizenship, critical thinking, rational thinking, creating a just, compassionate society, empathy, resilience, courage, imagination, scientific temper, developing communication skills, making engaged citizens, about gender inclusion, about equitable development, equitable society, about, creativity, about ethical moorings and values, right? These were not words, that were used earlier, okay? But these are precisely the liberal artsy values. Liberal artsy values is about lifelong learning. India has been a signatory to the, economic development goal of 2030, which was signed in 2015. Which mentions in one of its lines that lifelong learning is one of the goals for sustainable economic development globally, right? And that's also, been captured in this document. And if you were to, coming from FLAME and those who are associated with liberal arts institutions, you'll recognize immediately when you see these words that these are liberal artsy values. But that's not the word that's used in this document. The word that's used instead of liberal arts is holistic education, holistic and multidisciplinary education. But this is not the education that we have been used to in the country, right? And the reason why I said it's a radical departure is because of this, right? This is a transition. That radicalness of this policy is a transition from British system, which looked at, more and more narrow specializations right from schooling, right, to undergraduate education. Nobody is talking about masters here because mastery, is about narrow specialization. To an American educational ideal, I wouldn't say an American educational system, but to an American educational ideals and imbibing it. In the committee, there have been very influential people who have, whose tone and tenor and the language can be seen in these documents. The Manjul Bhargava, for one, is probably one of the greatest mathematicians alive, but also a great Sanskrit scholar and an kind of a Renaissance man and and an artist and an excellent tabla player and a singer and so on, right? He's the new Einsteinian ideal. He was critical in drafting this document, and this is where this transition has happened. If there is one thing that I can summarize this document, summarize this policy, we have finally, right, begun the process of unshackling ourselves from our colonial masters and moved just across to the pond to an American ideal. But this American ideal is the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s and 2000s ideal. 2020 seems to be a totally different ball game in America as of now. But we in India, we are always playing catch up with people in the West and with more developed societies anyways. But this is, revolutionary, not revolutionary, radical. Revolutionary, it's not revolutionary. I'll come to that a little later. You may have read it in the papers, right? So I'll come to that later. Okay, but then, workforce skills. There is another element here which seems to be using all the buzzwords about, essentially 21st century, second decade and third decade skills. This is not preparing you for, the rest of the 21st century. But if you were to look at the words that have been used, in terms of giving workforce skills to the populace of the country, so that they can be gainfully employed, they are not using anything that was used in the 80s, 70s, 60s. There's very, very little mention to medicine. There is a mention to biotechnology, pandemics, and so on. But there is a lot of reference to the buzzwords like artificial intelligence, big data, data science, climate change, machine learning, environmental impact, computer science, mathematics, and of course, high school education. They're insisting on foundational literacy and numeracy. So you may have read that from 6th standard onwards, coding should be taught to all the students, right? This is where this is coming from. There has been what I would call a STEMization, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics in the new educational policy. I dare to see, there is an undercurrent of, less emphasis being placed on the arts, humanities, and the social sciences. It has been given, lip service out there, but the emphasis has been more on humanistic values. What are these liberal artsy values, rather than on the disciplines themselves, right? Of arts, social sciences, humanities, or commerce, or business for it. But these are, very frequently used and used throughout. And this is what, the national education policy is saying, this is scary, but, if you're not adapted in the use of these things, you may have a tough time getting a job. But it, it tries to make up for it in later chapters, right? And of course, in pedagogy, there's also been a revolution in pedagogy, a radical departure in pedagogy. I'm not using these two as synonyms for the time being. It talks about flexibility. It is emphasizing from, it says, what we have always adopted, what the elite institutions have always adopted. It is recommending that the whole of the country should follow it, right? That assessments, that learning can't be just summative. You can't have one exam at the end and say, this is what the outcomes have been, this is how the outcomes have been achieved, which is a very British style system. So they have, maybe if you went to Oxford or Cambridge, you may not have yearly exams. You may take all the exams in the final year of your graduation, 2-hour exams to determine how much you have learned, right? So that's a radical departure. When they say the formative assessment, what we call as continuous assessment, that assessments have to be continuous, that you have to look at student learning outcomes, that you have to measure competencies. That's a radical departure from the British system. And that's a more American way of doing things. And that's the right way to do it. But then, we were yoked to that British idea. So what are these, right? It talks about discovery-based learning, inquiry-based learning, evidence-based learning, conceptual understanding, not rote learning, conceptual understanding. Talks about 21st century skills, right? You need to have life skills, you need to emphasize on health. You need to bring in sports in the curriculum. Okay, and you need to bring in many other stuff which was done on the side as part of the curriculum itself, right? And very importantly, this has become, the word cloud has made it 90 degrees. It's not a word that's used there. I summarized a big sentence in one word, that education has to be non-hierarchical. Right? There is, when you attend a social science class and a mathematics class, or a arts class where you are learning calligraphy, maybe all three have to be treated the same. There shouldn't be no differentiation or distinction made on the importance of each one of these subjects. And this is what breaking those silos thing comes in, that you need to stop thinking in terms of streams, which is what our colonial masters gave us, but look at education in its whole, as a unified whole, and where every aspect is very important, right? And also, we shouldn't forget our local context, right? That local context, that it has to be rooted in Indian ideals, is prevalent throughout the document, right? And this is what we talk about in Flame, that we are not a copy, we are not a copy and paste institution of an American liberal arts college, because we are totally rooted in the Indian context, and the Indian context makes us unique, right? But this is a recipe that is being suggested to every institution in the country, right? That's where the radical departure in pedagogy comes in, that these are going to be, right, implemented and monitored. These are no longer guidelines. They have an assessment forum. There is a body that will create assessments for every one of these things. You have heard of multilingual, mother tongue language formula and so on. I'll leave that as it is, right? So broadly, the conventional system, and this is what the NEP talks about, is fragmented. What are the banes of the current education system? If these circles are disciplines, each one of these disciplines don't talk to each other. And if they talk to each other, it would be interdisciplinary. But this document is very careful not to use the word interdisciplinary in too many places. I know where they are coming from. They use multidisciplinary. But right now, there is massive fragmentation, not only in in the kind of in the subjects that we teach in class, but in the educational institutions themselves, right? An engineering institution out here, let's say Pune, won't have a humanities and social sciences program in which it offers. Neither will it offer, except for maybe business English or effective communication or whatever. It won't teach engineering students literature, right? That fragmentation, that silo, is a very British way of looking at it. You're winnowing everyone into narrow streams right from schooling. And this NEP has recognized that this is a problem. And this is a severe problem, especially in the 21st century, when India is trying to take a leading place and trying to shape the world in terms of what the 21st century goals will be, or what the 21st century looks like. So what is the new education thing, right? It looks at broad liberal artsy frameworks, right? It is emphasizing on certain values that it calls holistic education, and inside these values are these disciplines that are going to play a role. So those values have to be imbibed, and only then, if you're not going to teach critical thinking is a word that comes very frequently, that's used very frequently throughout the document, and that's probably the most primary liberal arts value, right? So it is saying that at every level, every discipline, if you any discipline that you are going to teach, has to be based or set in a liberal artsy framework, and not this fragmentation, but this one. And this is where the unification and the recognition that knowledge is all one. It's just that it's a human invention that it's for administrative purposes that we have fragmented it. Right? If you're not going to communicate well, how are you going to tell what your ideas are? How are you going to get a job if you're interviewed? You keep reading the statistics about less than 15% of the students are unemployable. Engineering graduates are unemployable. Are employable, not unemployable. More than 85% of the students are employable. And that's because of, stuff that we discussed here, right? Communication skills, they haven't been exposed to the pedagogies, they can't be globally competitive. And it's also about being, our workforce being able, the education that we impart to our students, which is acceptable as top notch throughout the world. And in the chapter on internationalization of education, there is a great emphasis on this, right? If we want India to be an educational destination, and if we want to take leadership roles, education in the country has to follow this way, this path that has been enunciated. Right? So now I'm just coming to the thrust of the higher education policy. What it is saying right now is that it is multidisciplinary. Undergraduate education has to be multidisciplinary. And it begins with, the formula that you have seen, that this 5+3+3+4 for high school, where they have included the preschool here, which they call it the foundation. This is the preparatory foundation stage, the middle stage, and the secondary stage. This stage is going to be multidisciplinary. Right? And this seamlessly goes into the undergraduate education. And this is where this, thing is very important, that what you studied in school, the way you studied in school is what you will study in the university too. And I mean the university, at the bachelor's level. That, values, that, critical thinking will be emphasized from day one of your schooling to, to last day of your undergraduation or master's or PhD or whatever. And this is a kind of an onion approach that, where there are layers upon layers upon layers, rather than, growing, stuff which are siloed or fragmented like this, right? And that seamless integration, that the whole thing should be a continuum. This word is also used, which is very, makes me very happy, because this is exactly the same language that Flame has been using since 13 years, right? That this has to be a continuum, that, that this education, that these values of creating people who are good human beings with all these skills that they have, and with all these human capacities that have to be built, has to be reinforced at every stage. So there is no hard distinction between schooling and university. This would be university, but there is no hard distinction between schooling and university. And this is going to be one of the biggest challenges, because, in schools, you are already, doing the aptitude test at the 8th or 9th standard level, and saying your child will be a good art student, or a science student, and so on. And this is precisely the thing that these guys, the NEP drafters, are talking about, are warning against, that this can't be, business as usual anymore. Right? That's where the multidisciplinary thing comes in, that you can't fragment education into silos anymore. Okay, even vocational has been brought in. Coding also is in the sense of vocational, and all those internships and so on. I'm not going to address those which have already been covered in the papers. The second one, this is a more administrative thing. There will be consolidation of higher education institutions. I'll come to this a little later and tell you what the impact will be for future students, right? And that's an extremely significant impact from the way things are right now to a system that is more, I think, British and American and European. Okay. I'll come back to that later. Of course, the flexible curriculum and the integration of the vocational. When they use the word vocational, there is a big chapter on vocational, and it is emphasized throughout the document. When they talk about vocational, there is the reference to dignity of labor. For this they have been inspired. They're one of the examples that they take, not for vocational, but in terms of what percentage of the population as workforce has been exposed to vocational education. They give the example of Germany, South Korea, and Japan. If you have seen, Japanese schooling system, at least I haven't been to Japan, but the videos that I've seen on YouTube, right? school students take the responsibility of cleaning their classrooms, cleaning the toilets of their schools. Right? And there is a certain dignity of labor that has been brought in that is totally missing, especially to the current generation of, I would say, kids spoiled by the parents with excessive love and protection. Right? And the word dignity has been used, frequently there. And it's not just, creating people for the workforce, but then exposing every individual from the school level to some kind of vocational education, right? And this goes on to college, and the higher educational institutions have been given a mandate to integrate vocational into regular, degree programs, right? Of course, multiple exit options. I'll tell you what that is in a little while. So what this is saying here is, and this is where, I'll tell you the challenges of this, but multiple exit options for higher education is mainly in the context of UG. So this multiple exit options has been totally, cut, copied and pasted from the Delhi University 4-year program formula, where the formula is not 3+1, the formula is 1, 2, 3, and 4. Undergraduate education can be of 1-year duration, 2-year duration, 3-year duration, or 4-year duration. And at every level, there will be exit options given to the student. And this is where I think, I want to spend some more time on this. I'll tell the challenges later, but I'll tell you what this entails. The Delhi University, which was withdrawn, of course, in 2014, envisaged, and, of course, it was in operation before it was withdrawn, that if anybody who completes 1 year of an undergraduate program will end up with a certificate. So if they exit after 1 year, they get a certificate. I don't know what it denotes because the policy hasn't come out. After 2 years, they will get a diploma. After 3 years, they'll get a bachelor's. And after 4 years, they'll get again a bachelor's, but a 4-year bachelor's degree. This 4-year bachelor's degree, they haven't specified what form it will take, what will be the distinction between these two. There are subcommittees being formed, which is going to strategize and come up with the policies by March of 2021, right, about nomenclature and so on. This was the latest news report that came in. But the bachelor's degree, the 4-year bachelor's degree can also be with research. Okay, but to institutions like us, which wanted to have only 4-year bachelor's degrees, things have been made more complicated, and we don't know whether every institution will be forced to have 1 year or 1 year, forced to give 1-year exit options or 2-year exit options or 3-year exit options or 4-year exit options. This makes it extremely challenging to design a curriculum, because you have to plan not for 3 years at a stretch, but then you have to plan it 1 year at a time, right? And this is a challenge. And the reason why they want it, that's what is been left unstated there. But then, if you can connect the dots there, what they want, an academic bank of credits. And they want students to, take break years in between, go explore something and come back and continue their education. They don't want students to be, tied to a certain program, and if they exit in between, they're automatically withdrawn from the program. What that academic bank of credits tells you is that every course that a student does in a university, they'll get, this is like a savings account, where that course will be deposited in their savings account and the credits will be counted there. The credits and the course constitutes the, it's an analogy for the money, right? The number of courses that you take and pass, no matter where, it will all be stored in the academic bank of credits. And then any higher educational institution, which is higher educational institution, HEI has been defined in the document, can look at the academic bank of credits, okay, and decide to award a degree based on the balance, bank balance of credits in the student's account. For instance, he may study 1 year in Delhi University, second year, or some courses from IIT, third year from any other place. And then in the last place that he has been in, it can count all these credits that he has earned in other institutions and award a degree. And it hasn't been specified in such detail, but that's the whole purpose of academic bank of credits. And there is a line there which says that the degree awarding educational institution, that's a higher educational institution, can count all these credits that the student has accumulated in the bank. I would say a terrible idea. The implementation will be, this will create a lot of litigation, and I see a lot of problems in this, but that's the idea of 1, 2, 3, and 4-year exit options. Right? So I didn't say revolutionary earlier, and the transition from British to American is not complete for the simple reason that we have made it worse. We still have 3-year degrees out there. There is a recognition that all degree programs, okay, and it says the preferred option, the preferred undergraduate degree duration should be 4 years. But it has, complicated the issue. It has poisoned the well by bringing in exit options after 1, 2, 3, and 4 years. It will be a massive challenge for any curriculum designer to ensure that there are, specific learning outcomes after 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years. The 2-year degree is a standard degree in the US. It's not a degree. It's called the associate program, right? But I don't know what that 1 year means. In the British system, the 1 year is a preparatory year for students who come from, who have weak academic credentials or who don't know English language and so on. This is something that's not very clear. There will be more clarity over the coming months, and by 2021 there should definitely be more clarity. This implementation of this will definitely take 4-5 years. It's not going to impact anybody who is entering the higher educational institution right now. If the policy is going to take nearly 8 months to come in, it can only be applied from next academic year, and the incoming batch of the next academic year will get impacted. Right? So, of course, there is an innovative learning environment. What is innovative is, I'm sure many of the people out here have experienced this. Right? When we talk about innovative learning environment, it's essentially all the discussion-based learning, discovery-based learning, having design thinking, having these, project-based learning, teamwork, bringing in many other elements into the curriculum. So remember, the national education policy is also trying, is mainly trying to address the lowest common denominator. They're not trying to, they're barely touching upon what the elite institutions of the country are doing, right? Essentially, continuous assessment is what they call as the innovative learning environment, okay? And the emphasis on vibrant campus life. This is where, I'll come back to this document, this, which I left here, the consolidation of higher educational institutions. This has been untouched from the draft national, the draft NEP policy. In the country, the NEP envisages only 3 types of institutions, and I'll give its analogies, I'll give its analogous institutions that are there in the US. There are 3 types of institutions that should exist in the country after 15 years. This is the timeline is 15 years. And that's research intensive universities. Okay. It defines what a university should be. A university should be multidisciplinary. Okay, and when it says multidisciplinary, it means a lot, many more disciplines that to what it currently means. Currently is in the country. The second one is teaching intensive universities. What is the difference between the two? A research university is top notch when it comes to teaching and research. This is an ampersand. It is, both are equal. Okay. In teaching universities, teaching is top notch, but it also does research. It is not looking for excellence in research, but then it does a high amount of research. It's an university, right? It has to be multidisciplinary. When it's, there are two kinds of multidisciplinary, which I'll come to, These two are degree granting institutions. The third type are, anyway, so I hope everyone can see this. Anju, can you see what I'm writing here at the bottom of the screen?
No, not now.
Okay, so let me just come here, right? Let me write here. Three types of institutions, right? One is a research university. One is a teaching university. Can you see this now?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, so this is research universities, are first among equals. Let me put it that way. They are extremely good in both teaching and research. Teaching universities are extremely good in teaching, but they also do research. So a university should offer undergraduate, masters, and PhD programs. Okay, so every university has to offer these programs. But this is, whereas they are looking at equity across the board, a teaching university is one which hasn't made it as far as research is concerned, but is excellent in teaching. The third type of institution is an autonomous degree granting college. This one is very critical. Okay. There are quite a few autonomous colleges in the country, including Ferguson in Pune, St. Xavier's in Mumbai, and so on. They can't give their own degrees. Their autonomy is mainly in the context of them devising their own syllabus and having their own assessments. Right? If you were in an affiliated college, if there is a college affiliated to a certain university, the exams are conducted by the university. The college is just there to provide the infrastructure for the classes to happen and for the lab facilities. There is nothing else that the college has control over, except maybe a little bit of control over admissions. Right? Otherwise, assessment, setting of syllabi, having all these other components are all, designed by the university. The university that the college is affiliated. Where this autonomous degree, right now you have autonomous colleges which can devise their own syllabi, which can have their own assessments, but they can't be degree granting institutions. Right? This one is a major switch. Now, where does this idea come from? I'm going to take the American example. A research university is like a Harvard or a Stanford. Okay. A teaching university is more like many of these private universities that are there that you don't know much about, but also state universities, the American state universities, right? It may be Ohio State and all, which is very good in teaching, but they'll have 40,000-50,000 students. A research university may be a Caltech with very little undergraduate strength, but mostly PhD, masters, and graduate students out there. What's an autonomous degree granting college? That's your top liberal arts colleges in the US. Remember, in the US, everything has a liberal artsy focus, right? You have general education, you do 2 years of liberal arts courses. There's a foundation that's called general education, and then you declare your major, and then you specialize after 2 years. Every one of these, whether it's a Harvard or a state university or a liberal arts college, does the same thing. But liberal arts colleges, in the vocabulary used by NEP, is a degree granting autonomous college. It's not affiliated to any universities. It can design its own curriculum and grant degrees. They tend to be multidisciplinary institutions. But their main program is undergraduate. So a Wellesley or a Amherst or a Williams, which are among the top 3 liberal arts college, right? will be designated as an autonomous degree granting college in India. And the idea of this, that they have to be, NEP mentions that they have to be primarily undergraduate, where research is not very important, but then they can offer masters and PhD programs. This doesn't stop autonomous degree granting colleges from offering a master's program or a PhD program, but then it is not expected, there is no compulsion to offer masters or or PhD programs out there. There won't be any regulatory pressure on that front, but and they won't be measured, accredited on the basis of their research output. They're primarily undergraduate, but they can also offer masters and PhD programs. And this is where these three categories are exactly the categories that are there in the US, right? And this is where I said, we have moved away from the British system to the American system, and because I think many of the committee members who drafted it and the invitees were exposed to this kind of education, and there is great value in this rather than the British way of doing things, right? And this is where and the timeline for this, that there won't be any affiliated colleges in the next 15 years. Everyone will either become a university, will become part of a research university, teaching university, or will be converted to an autonomous degree granting college. And every one of these have to become multidisciplinary. Every one of this. So this word keeps coming across very often. And what does this entail? Right? What this entails is that if there is a mechanical engineering student, you should have courses for him or her in the humanities, in the social sciences, in the arts, in sports, or in many other things. That has to become part of the curriculum. And you should build those departments, though that capacity building has to happen right away. The only institutions which are essentially autonomous degree granting colleges in the country which are doing very well are the IITs and the NITs. Every IIT, for instance, has a department of humanities and social sciences. They offer their own master's programs, and their undergraduate engineering students, there are these electives that they can take from the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. They want this process to be replicated across, but then they're demanding. What this also means is that an arts college that exists should also be introducing, the science streams, the technology streams, and so on. There has to be, the education can't be siloed into streams. There will no longer be arts students, commerce students, or science students. You may go on to specialize in a major and a minor, but your education at least the foundational years have to be multidisciplinary. And this is where this thing comes in, the one that I showed you, that no matter which, whether you are in college, whether you're in school or university, a student will have to take classes in critical thinking, ethics, social sciences, let me call this SSC, right? Humanities, arts, and so on. And then, there will be a component where, if they specialize in mechanical engineering, there will be mechanical engineering. Every one of these, disciplines are equally important. And that's the thrust of the new education policy. It's a challenge. It's an extremely difficult task for people to, implement this. But I don't know how, that has to be seen, how it's going to be implemented, right? So I'll take questions later, so and when we talk about these things, right, when we talk about research universities, teaching universities, and autonomous degree granting colleges, we are talking in some sense of consolidation. You have, the NEP envisaged massive university towns where universities have to have at least 40,000-50,000 students living on campus. They reduce the number to 8,000, then it has become every institution should have a minimum of 3,000 students is what the new draft policy suggests. But then when they're talking about vibrant campus life, they're emphasizing on not just classroom teaching, but what happens outside the classroom, that has to be curated by the educational institution. So student, club activities, for instance, has to be curated by the institution. If you're having, you should have life skill courses being, as part of the curriculum. You should have value added courses. You should have courses on, universal human values and so on. The UGC is coming out with a lot of guidelines and the curriculum for all these things. There are graduate attributes that it is, in anticipation of the national education policy, it has come out with a lot of stuff which reinforces what the national education policy is talking about, but it's giving out in much more detail, right? So college can't be just going, for a student to go there, be attend classes and get out, right? It has to be a vibe. It is emphasizing on a vibrant campus life. And that's again an American style. You go to college and you go to a different city and you live in that city, because, educational institutions will be clustered right now. They won't be spread word. It's no longer will be the case. That's what the goal is. I don't see that happening, that you have a building in the middle of the city with 3 floors and that's a college, and there's no other facility available to have a vibrant campus life. That campus life is being emphasized and again emphasized again and again in that document. Again, this is about going to college in the American sense of the word, right? It is sort of duplicating the American college going experience in India, in terms of the scale at which their universities are. And that's the scale that they want Indian universities to be in. They are asking educational institutions for, to form knowledge hubs. So if I am an arts college, they have given a way out for me to survive. If I am, and let's say I'm College of Arts and Commerce, Jack College of Arts and Commerce, I need to make it multidisciplinary, but I have only 2,000 students. The minimum number for an educational institution is 3,000 students. Now, for any educational institution, it has provided a way out by forming knowledge clusters. The ones who know the liberal artsy, 6 college consortiums and all will, directly appreciate this. They are asking, institutions in the local areas to come together and put their, and share their resources. For instance, if I'm an arts college, I'm an engineering college right next door. It is the NEP is saying, why don't you guys to collaborate and form a knowledge cluster? You specialize in arts, we'll specialize in engineering, and both of us together can, partner and do this and maybe award degrees under the same banner. IIT, Monash and all, there are a lot of examples out here in the US too. There, many of these liberal arts colleges in the Boston area and in California, the Harvey Mudd and, all these places do this. I suggest that you go and look at these examples. So it is, the national knowledge, national education policy, while trying to, integrate campuses and consolidate educational institutions, it's also giving a way out to survive, because there have been very successful examples out there. For instance, a Wellesley College student or an Amherst College student go and study engineering in MIT. There will be students of Amherst or Wellesley, but they can take courses in MIT or All-In or Boston or, the consortium of colleges that they are a part of, right? Because they are very close by, each one of them can harness the expertise of the other and give a excellent, maybe a more engaging and more meaningful experience to the student who wants to explore different disciplines, right? And that student engagement is again critical, making it interesting and making, learning outcomes and student engagement has been emphasized upon, massively in this document. That engagement has to begin from what is currently preschool, what they call it the foundational years, from age 3 onwards, till they finish their education. And that education never finishes, because there is an emphasis on open and distance learning, what they call as ODL, that lifelong learning is a goal, right? And this has been, constantly reinforced that every university should ensure that people should be able to come back to university and build structures, infrastructures or any other structures that enables anybody to take courses in the university and up their skills. So education is not going to stop at the undergraduate level, neither at the master's level or at the PhD level. Or once you graduate, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be coming back to university. You may not come back to the university physically. Once you have finished your basic learning, the basic learning is still PhD maybe. But then at any age, a citizen of the country should be able to access courses that are available. This is paying service to the success of Coursera and all these platforms that have come up for reskilling or upskilling the workforce and for people who are self-learners right away. They want the responsibility of this and the delivery of this to be taken up by the universities. Right? So,
so Santosh sir, you want to take some questions?
Yeah, I just finished the last one.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Okay.
Sure.
So the critical one, so there has been a centralization of regulation and separation of powers. Okay, which I will, this is administration. Okay, I'll address if there is a question on that. What happens to UGC? What happens to AICTE? What happens to NAC? What happens to NBA and so on? Okay, so there is a fragmentation and defragmentation of regulatory bodies in the country under the new NEP. Okay, so I'll come to that. But the last point that I want to emphasize is that none of this is possible in higher education or in any education if you don't have motivated, energized, capable faculty. I just copy and pasted this from the document itself. Okay, but I'll read this out to you, and this will tell you what the challenges are, and then this is where I'll throw some statistics in. Okay. This is an extract from the document. This is page 40. Right? If you can't see it, I will read this out to you, and especially as I said, this is a talk from the trenches, right? I'll read this out to you, and the challenges that face that every educational institution in the country will face. At least 99% of them will face in trying to implement this and making it a success. Okay, and this line is very critical, right? I'll read this out. And then, I'll make some preliminary because before I take questions. Compensation levels of permanent faculty in public institutions have also been increased substantially, right? This is that chapter there. Various initiatives have also been taken providing faculty with professional development opportunities. However, despite these various improvements in the status of the academic profession, faculty motivation in terms of teaching, research, and service in higher educational institutions remains far lower than the desired level. Right? That faculty motivation in terms of teaching, research, and service. The various factors that lie behind low faculty motivation levels must be addressed to ensure that each faculty member is happy, enthusiastic, engaged, and motivated towards advancing her or his students' institution and profession, right? That's the crux is here. And this is the key point. When we talk about continuous assessment, this is extremely critical that the faculty are engaged with the students and they know every student who is there. There has been a lot of autonomy in terms of this. This paragraph here talks about this. How do you build engagement, right? Faculty will be, I'm reading this again and I'm quoting it from the document. Faculty will be given the freedom to design their own curricular and pedagogical approaches within the approved framework. Who is going to be the approval framework? There are these general education councils, that regulatory framework is there, including textbook and reading material selections, assignments, and assessments. Empowering the faculty to conduct innovative teaching, research, and service as they see best will be a key motivator and enabler for them to do truly outstanding creative work. This comes about from the fact that every institution will be either a university or a degree granting institution.
there won't be any affiliated colleges where somebody, the affiliating university will be conducting examinations and so on. Right? And this is, again, if this comes about, and if every educational institution in the country becomes autonomous, obviously there will be a sense of ownership is what they are expecting. But then in terms of implementation for public institutions, compensation levels have increased substantially, is killing every state government in the country. The salaries have increased substantially, but not many state governments can afford to pay those salaries. Not many schools or colleges can afford to pay those salaries. And that's where the document talks about public institutions. Even West Bengal hasn't even moved to 6th pay commission, forget 7th pay commission. 7th pay commission is what, the central government is adopting. The 5th pay commission is 2000, late 90s salaries is what they are getting by the way. So, most of the state governments are bankrupt. Public institutions can't afford to pay these salaries. Even central government institutions, for instance, if the cream of the cream, the top icing on the cake, which are the IITs and NITs, the statistics a year ago was that 36% of their faculty positions are vacant. 36%. And this also has got to do with low faculty-student ratios. And that's where the 36% of the positions are vacant. If the central government, which can print money, can't afford to have, fill their positions there, how can the state governments or private institutions fill it? And that's what I feel from the trenches is what's going to, be the clincher for the success of this policy. There will be jugadu ways of, in India, everything is about compliance. Nobody looks at the spirit. I can very well see next year every institution branding themselves as multidisciplinary institutions. They'll say they have implemented NEP in full. What it means is every engineering college will have a department of humanities and social sciences. They'll put some 2 faculty there and offer some 2 courses as part of the curriculum and say we are, we have abided by NEP norms or whatever norms that are going to come in, because they have made their institution multidisciplinary by integrating social sciences and the humanities and the arts in an engineering college, right? But if compliance is the goal, and if those goals are not going to be met, if you don't have faculty motivation, if you don't have capable, competent, and talented faculty to teach all these things, and look at the recognition that providing clean working toilets, this is from the document, will help in one of the ways to recommends the following initiatives to achieve best motivated and capable faculty. It goes down to such bare minimum levels as providing clean working toilets in educational institutions. Forget blackboards, offices, teaching supplies, libraries, clean drinking water. If this is what is being recognized, how are you going to achieve? These are the challenges. How are you going to achieve the lofty ideals that have been, that have been envisaged as a humanistic ideal and the liberal artsy ideal that every institution in the country can follow? But this is where the lesson from the US comes in. Liberal arts programs in the US are the most expensive. A Wellesley College or a Amherst College is more expensive than a Harvard or a Stanford. Okay. And this is the reason, because of all these facilities, low student-teacher ratios not being too high, all these facilities, this is all infrastructure and many more. This kind of engagement and achievement can be done only in very intimate, small settings. And that's the reason why liberal arts colleges are more expensive than maybe the top universities in the world, at least in terms of tuition fees. And dictating this as mandating this as a recipe for every college to follow. If you're worrying about clean working toilets and clean drinking water, good luck. right? And this is where I think, the clincher is this. How will you motivate a highly educated person to teach in or work in a college that doesn't have working toilets or can't provide clean drinking water? They may be drawing government salaries from the pay. So government pay commission salaries are very good, but not many governments can afford to pay it. Very few, less than a fraction of the private institutions in the country are paying seventh pay commission salaries out here, right? And this will be the challenge. This is, that's unless that's addressed, everything is an aspiration, and an aspiration that will remain for the rest of the century. I don't think we can ever meet it. Okay, so I'll stop here, and through the questions, maybe, I'll answer. Yeah. Can I take these questions like this? Yeah.
Yes.
So who will have Aditya Nahar is asking, who will have an advantage in this new system, right? Newer colleges or incumbent colleges? I'll give you an example, Aditya. We have been discussing this very frequently. I'll go back to this slide about flexible curriculum, right? And multidisciplinary learning. This is multidisciplinary undergraduate education. Let's say if I have a college which offers arts, science, commerce, and engineering in the same campus, they have a nominal advantage in that they can say, look, I'm opening up the arts majors or minors to the engineering students and vice versa. I can have my mechanical engineering student teaching, taking a political science class or a political science minor, and I'll stream it. The number of major minor combinations, there are some colleges right in our neighborhood in Pune itself who very well, right? So they can immediately do this. But the challenge there is that the word cloud that I described, how will non-motivated faculty, faculty who don't have that motivation or the capability, address these issues out here? How will they teach problem solving, critical thinking, scientific temper? That becomes a massive challenge. And if those institutions were to implement it in small classrooms, then the cost of education becomes extremely prohibitive. As I told you, liberal arts colleges are the most expensive colleges in the world. Okay, more than the topmost colleges that are there, because it comes with these values, teaching these values, delivering these values in very intimate and in an engaging managing.
So here, Surya Kumar is asking, is there any provision for faculty development in the NEP where they have specified on, how if they're going to change?
There is, but I'll just answer this and get back there. That's where this comes in. But faculty development, right? Again, there is a problem there. Faculty development, when you talk about it, is about teaching them how to incorporate these elements in their curriculum. But most colleges, when I talk about IITs and NITs, nearly 40%, that is more than 30% of the seats are vacant, right? They're running classes with 200, 300 students. How will they, monitor students' progress? How will they teach, maybe, problem solving? How will they make the class engaging? That's not going to happen with faculty development when there are no faculty who can be given, who can be paid his worth in financial, right? And there won't be any quality, there won't be any, flight to educational institution of quality students. We are facing a severe faculty crunch. We are facing a severe faculty crunch. Even if, let's say, 100 people come back from the US, from the top institutions, we don't have, we can't afford them. Costs are financial. There are opportunity costs for a bright student to take up a career in the industry, then come to university and become a teacher, right, or a researcher, right? And this is where, I don't think incumbent colleges can design curriculum from the grounds up but newer, not income, newer colleges can create curriculum from the grounds up. But then if you don't have the financial resources to fund this has to be on a massive endowment model. The government can't afford to do it. Private institutions have to be extremely, extremely rich to fund this in the scale that it has been envisaged out here and have quality faculty talent. Finally, it all boils down to faculty talent in all these institutions to address all these things. Faculty development programs, I don't see any way that they can fill the gap when it comes to this. And this is also about attitude and aptitude and a culture fit, right? Most of the people in the country have never heard of these terms at all, and they are teachers in colleges, right? What is the importance of good citizenship? What is the importance of critical thinking? Imagine questioning in a rural college, a student questioning the teacher on what he has said. He'll get thrown out of class immediately. But critical thinking is about challenging the ideas that have been put across, right? Do they have that? Have they been sensitized to this thinking that, a teacher, a guru can be questioned in the classroom? I don't see
that. Similar thought. Sangeeta asks that, what this means to university, for example, like Flame, where we started as liberal arts as a focus area.
Yeah.
And also then she adds few things about majors and minors. Maybe Sangeeta, we can, tell this about later. But then, yes, coming to the multidisciplinary approach, the NEP is talking about, and how Flame has been, we started with that fundamental.
So I'll give you an example, right? So majors and minors is what's going to be the norm. Again, the word, the phrase major and minor comes not from a British system, but from the American system. The NEP talks about majors and minors. Okay, and that's where they talk about, in the context of multidisciplinarity. So when you are doing mechanical engineering as a major, you can minor in political science or the other way around. Imagine a student studying in MIT, doing a minor in economics or in business at the Sloan School, and then majoring in computer science or any of these nuclear engineering, for instance, right? That example is Elon Musk. He's a physics grad who went on to do a double major. Then he stayed back for a year and he got another major in business from the Wharton School. He went to UPenn, but he's a physics grad, and he went to Stanford and for the graduate PhD program and ran away in 1 year, 1 day, I think, less than a year or whatever that's worth, because he thought the PhD program won't add value much. So the major and minor, the advantage for us, the major and minor concept has existed in terms of specializing, has existed in scientific institutions, technical institutions like BITS for a long time. BITS, the mentor for BITS initially in the 50s was MIT. So the BITS was modeled on the American education system from day one. The IITs are looking at honors programs, majors and minors and so on. I think IIT Bombay has already introduced it. IITs and all are already all technical programs in the country are 4-year programs, right? The 4-year is not the big deal out here. The 4-year for BA, BSc, the sciences, arts and humanities is a big deal. But then they have again, complicated the issue by saying by saying there should be exit options after 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, and 4 years.
So a related question here is, will these credit points, like you have an exit after a first year, second year, third year, and of course the 4-year option. So the credits, would these credits be transferable, like for example, from a college like IIT to a small college in a town?
Yeah.
And the question is by Jacqueline. So if you could just answer this.
So when I talked about the academic bank of credit, right? So that's exactly the point Kapil Sibal had been talking about since 2010, that there has to be an academic bank of credits. They'll establish an agency which will record the courses that every student takes, right? It is like our Aadhaar card kind of thing, everybody, or a PAN card, where everybody will have every student will have an account. They're already started dematerializing DigiLocker, CBSE mark sheets are going to come on DigiLocker and so on, right? So that's already happened. Their idea is that courses that the student takes in any university will be recorded in a bank, which is maybe a central bank, and the courses that a student takes, any other institution can access that data. Now, if I want to transfer from Bombay University, the question of IITs to rural and rural college to IITs is a question of admission, which I don't know the answer to this, because this has to come from the policy. But let's say there are two institutions, A and B, right? There are two institutions, A and B. A student has done some courses in institution A, taken an exit option after 1 year. Can he transfer to institution B? What NEP is saying, that already happens right now, but what NEP is saying is institution B will access the courses that student A did through the academic bank. It will see his bank balance there. This is like the credit card or whatever rating that each one of us gets, they give a rate. Institution B can see the courses and credits that student has done from the academic bank, and then give admission to that student in their university. And the last university that he gets himself admitted to, he'll get admission only if that university has vetted all the credits that the student has taken, and they will award the degree. But after every year is getting a certificate, a diploma, and so on. This is my reading of the situation right now. There is not much clarity, but this
also, I don't think
right
so,
now has been
unless...
stated in the document. What I mentioned right now has been stated in the document, that they want mobility of students to be seamless. Okay, they use the word mobility from one institution to the other to be seamless. They are mainly addressing central government employees whose children have to transfer from one institution to the other. The Kendriya Vidyalayas were essentially built for this purpose, but then I think they are replicating this to the higher education level. Whether from rural.
There's another very interesting question. It says, what do you think? What would you think that MNCs would choose students from liberal arts colleges over the student from institutions like maybe Delhi University after the change in this curriculum in education has been kind of is going forward? So
this is where I think the challenge that has been in India. In the US, it's very clear that the liberal arts students are extremely accomplished and very, very good, right? There is not much awareness of liberal arts programs in the country. What NEP has done right now has made it mainstream. What we, the few liberal arts institutions in the country were doing and shouting at the top of their voice that this should be the curriculum and this is the right kind of education that everyone should get, right, is now being made mainstream by the national education policy. One has to remember that, at least for jobs in the country, there is not much awareness, but from now this year onwards, that awareness will increase. And I think, the 4-year program will become, at least a 4-year BA will be a much more valuable program than a 3-year. And because of this emphasis, and there's and because of the massive, press that NEP is receiving, and there's not much talk about higher education as that, because everyone is, stressing on the multilingual formula about teaching in the mother tongue. But this will become mainstream, and I think the liberal arts students in the country will be much in demand. At least the 4-year students will be much in demand, rather than the people who are coming from conventional streams, because this is exactly what employers are looking for, but they didn't have any exposure for that kind of, whether that kind of education exists in the country at all, right?
So, sir, now I'm take a question from a student, Bhavika Surana. She says, "Hi, sir, I'm a high school student and I'm wondering if NEP will have an impact on my undergraduation program, because will the changes be made by the time I reach college in 2 years?" So
yes.
For the whole world, actually, but she's anxious to know how is it going to impact her.
Yes. So right now, I'll remove this. Maybe, okay. I'll just write it here. Maybe I'll give you the timelines. Okay. 2021-22 batch NEP will be implemented for sure. Okay, so we are hoping that since it has been circulated right now, there is no significant impact, but the the ones who will implement the fastest, okay, if you join the institutions where it is being implemented, where the institution is agile and implements it very soon, then then it will impact you. Of course, I'll have to say this, that Flame, right, in the NEP document looks like a marketing brochure of Flame. Some of you have been, I see that some, if you had seen an info session of Flame University, it exactly talks about, it uses the same vocabulary, the same language, the same ideas. It envisages the same thing that NEP is talking about. So institutions like Flame are already NEP compliant, except for the 4-year program, which, the moment the clarity comes in about what the nomenclature for 4-year and bachelor's degree is, will be ready. It's already, in accordance with what this program is. But the challenge is for engineering institutions, right? Arts and commerce colleges, they have to introduce STEM there. Engineering institutions have to introduce arts and science and whatnot. They have, I don't know how fast they can move. And, only the very elite institutions can afford to do a good job in this. Again, remember, liberal arts curriculum is extremely difficult to implement and very expensive.
And like you said, sir, I think the key is in implementation. While the program and what they're offering looks fabulous, but how you're going to deliver the program will be of the most important aspect, I think, of making it a successful policy. If that
implementation, right? I just watched, today was, the first webinar that happened on discussion of NEP. The Prime Minister addressed, there was a day-long live telecast of the UGC discussion on NEP, where the chairman of the drafting committee, Kasturi Rangan, and all were present. And the Prime Minister said, the key is in implementation. Okay, it's an aspirational document, but if you don't implement, it's not going to be. And I see the biggest challenge when you can't pay faculty, can they be motivated, right? And this concerns 99.99% of the institutions in the country. 99.99%. Many of the institutions will just do compliance and not keep to the spirit of the thing. They'll just say they'll open a Department of Social Arts and Humanities, or Humanities and Social Sciences. We have complied, right? We have this program right now. But it is not about content. NEP says that you have to move beyond content to skills, to life skills. Content is passé. Content is hygiene. It is no longer important. It is assumed that content will be delivered, but you have to go much beyond content, and that requires a lot of investment in faculty and other resources, right? And that's where the implementation is the key. Except for the elite institutions, the top. When I say elite, not in terms of in terms of their quality. I'm not using elite in any other sense of the word. Except for the top institutions in the country, 99.99% of the institutions can't afford to implement it. Definitely not in the next 10 years.
So, sir, to this, what is one message you would like to give to students who will pass out their grade 12 now?
So that message is very clear.
Choose the course and the college. Question from an account where it doesn't look like a name, but it's Realme 5i. So, question from this person saying that what advice do you give to these grade 12, how to choose their university?
To the grade 12 students, this is now hygiene. A liberal arts education, what is, let me put it, a holistic and multidisciplinary education is hygiene. Look for an institution which offers multidisciplinary and holistic education. Don't go to an institution which offers single streams. Don't go to an institution which offers single streams, because it is already obsolete. This document has made most of the institutions in the country obsolete. You'll have to look at an institution just to be, with it in the front line, right? Just to be competitive, because, by the time there'll be, from next year onwards, or from 2-3 year onwards, there will be a huge bunch of students who will be entering these programs, where many of these institutions will become multidisciplinary and holistic. I don't want, I want to use the word liberal, but then, because of the culture wars, the NEP doesn't use the word liberal, but go for a liberal education program. There is no, there is no substitute for it anymore, because the government is saying a liberal education program is the only program that is worthwhile to pursue, and it is asking every institution to do.
So,
Right? I think that's my suggestion.
Thank you, sir. So there's a question from Bhavna. She says, will the degree program change from 3 to 4 years in FLAME in 2021 batch? So we do have 1 year scholars program, which kind of,
So the difference between, what we have done, so actually, right, so the NEP talks about this, which we always talked about. I'm not able to write it here, that the ideal duration of an undergraduate program is 4 years. But then it has, muddied the waters by giving these exit options. And it says, to achieve the goals of all these things, about achieving the goal of producing a good human being with all the skills that I mentioned out there, which the NEP mentions, the ideal duration of an undergraduate program, preferred duration, it's not the ideal, they use the word preferred duration, is 4 years, right? Now, we know this, because of the 3-year thing, we offer a 4-year program with an exit option after 3 years. But then it was not an integrated, the students stayed for 4 years, they're not getting an integrated degree. They're getting 2 certificates. One is a bachelor's degree, and the other is a postgraduate diploma. With the NEP, you will get only one bachelor's degree, that will be a 4-year degree. What will be the nomenclature of the bachelor's degree? Will it be Bachelor of Arts 4 years or whatever? We have no clarity right now. The government is going to come back and tell us, by March 2021, about what the nomenclature of these degrees are. But, many of our peer institutions and us, we do offer 4-year programs. We are already there. Instead of getting 2 certificates right now, you'll get 1 certificate.
So Vaishali asked that, would it be a disadvantage being a 3-year program from employability perspective? I mean, if somebody on 3 years.
Yes. Who do you think an employer would prefer? So that question is related to your old question of an MNC. Let's say it's an American MNC, right? That guy who is, maybe the bosses and all, it's a global workplace, would have gone through a 4-year program, and you will see that definitely there is great value in a 4-year program, because the NEP talks about cognitive skills and intellectual cognitive maturity of the student. Right, why should you have all these 4-year programs, right? Why can't you just deliver the content in 1 year and be done with it and do a super specialization? It is not looking at workforce. It is not looking at specific skills. It is looking at, producing or developing good human beings. Right, a 4-year program, it is mentioned that it's a preferred duration, and the longer the time that you study in college, at least at the undergraduate level, the better skills you have. We have seen this in Flame University, that the 4-year students are much more intellectually mature and much more capable than the ones who have take the exit option after 3 years, because the 4th year comes when you're 21, 20.
But I would want you to address from a parent perspective, and I'll just.
There is no substitute to a 4-year program. Yeah.
Yes. So
there is no substitute to a 4-year program.
Yeah.
So if we as an institution were given a choice, we would go for a 4-year program with no exit options.
4-year program.
Yeah. With no exit options, by the way.
Yeah. So parents feel कि जो चीज 3 साल में हो रही है 4 साल, why waste a year? 1 साल.
That's not going to happen.
So,
yeah. The 3-year program.
What is the reason why we are saying 4 years? Yeah.
Anju, let me just address this 3 years versus 4 years.
Yes.
Right? Yes. 3 years is a narrowing of specializations, right? You're thinking of streams from 9th, 10th standard, and then the 3 years makes sense. If you just wanted to study commerce, you started studying commerce from 9th and 10th, then you have studied commerce for 5 years. But the approach is totally different now. It is not about narrow specializations. It's about multidisciplinary knowledge. It's about connecting the dots. It's about, learning, getting ideas from different disciplines. NEP is talking about replicating the school model at the undergraduate level. So you'll learn critical thinking in school. You will learn critical thinking in high school, in your undergraduate program. Why? Why are you learning it again and again? The reason is because when you learned it in school, they talk about cognitive skills. Your brain hasn't matured as yet when you are in school. You're pretty young. Your brain, development of your brain when you're 18, 19 is much different from your capacity when you're much younger. So all these skills, it is about reinforcement at every stage of your life. And that's what the continuum is. This is an onion model of education. You keep building layers upon top of each other. You keep reinforcing this every now and then, rather than planting a different seed every time and fragmenting it. So the 4-year is very critical there. And if every program becomes 4 years, that's the preferred duration, by the way. The 3-year program will go out of fashion very soon. That's the validation that the government has given. That's the government is saying. Don't go for a 3-year program, go for a 4-year program. I personally believe that the 3 years is transition period, right? 10 years later, it will all be 4 years. There is no reason why a engineering program should be 4 years and an economics program should be 3 years. Okay, so the normal duration of any undergraduate program will become 4 years very soon. So there is in terms of content and all, there is no doubt in my mind or in the government's mind right now that the preferred duration is 4 years.
But only the thing that you suspect is the chaos it will create with those multiple exit options, which probably the policy says.
Yeah.
But that will be upon people to decide what they want to do, and I'm sure they'll have their goals. So I think we've addressed quite a lot of questions, and we've gone half an hour over time. But would you like to just say some closing notes, sir?
Yeah. So we are very excited about the NEP because, as I said, that looks like our marketing brochure. It has validated. When Flame began in 2007, it was precisely with these values. What has been recognized, it is 30 years too late. The last NEP happened in 1992. It was a revision then. The Yashpal committee in 2005 or so did something, suggested scientific temper and all, but nobody talked about it because of the priorities were different. But education right now, we are on the right track aspirationally, but given the challenges, when in the same document you're talking about clean working toilets and clean drinking water, this is not an easy game. We have to learn from the West. If you move to the American education system, the most expensive programs are the ones which are trying to meet the goals of education that has been enunciated in NEP. Right? I don't see that being done, except for compliance. I don't see that being implemented very well across the country. But to the prospective students and to the counselors here, I would like to say that, with this validation of a 4-year program, right, especially your students who are going there, I think the focus should move away from streams. I don't think anybody will be an art student or a commerce student or a science student anymore. I think that focus, that multidisciplinarity, and that has to be imbibed, the students have to be sensitized, parents have to be sensitized, that education has to be seen as a whole rather than in narrow silos, right? And I think this with the NEP, I think this is going to be forced upon every institution. Parents will have no choice but to abide by it, right? And I think exciting times ahead. Let's look at how it pans out. How many institutions do a good job. At least we have 13 years of experience in terms of delivering it, and trying to make it, there were some questions on the cost associated with it. This is precisely why it is that expensive. That none of these, motivated faculty, capable faculty, and engaged faculty don't come cheap. And that's a warning lesson to the Prime Minister and the rest of the people there that, if you don't fill in the vacant positions, it's not going to make much of a dent. It will create more confusion across the country. But 4-year elite institutions will definitely move towards 4 years right away. Yeah, I mean, thanks. I think that's all. There are many questions out there, but I think this is all I can take right now.
So we'll be sending the recording to everybody by tomorrow morning, and also a small email where you could just send us some more questions, and we'll try and address those personally with you. And thank you so much, sir. It was actually, I have read through the policy, but the certain things that you unfolded so beautifully, I think, we've absorbed it even more with your session today. So thank you so much for your time. And thank you to all the participants who've been engaged with us for the whole session. Hope you have a very safe and a good weekend. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. I'm sorry I couldn't take any more questions, but I think, for the interest of time, let me end here soon.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Yes, see you.